As the sun began its descent, painting the sky with warm hues of orange and pink, the guests at the wedding started to settle into their seats. Each chair was carefully decorated with delicate white flowers and satin ribbons, adding to the elegance of the setting. The air was filled with an electric buzz of anticipation and emotion as everyone eagerly awaited the start of the ceremony. The soft murmur of conversation mingled with the occasional laughter, but beneath it all, there was a deep sense of reverence for the moment that was about to unfold. At the altar, Scott stood tall and composed, though inside his nerves were a tangled mess. He adjusted the tie of his impeccably tailored black suit, making sure it was perfectly straight. His hands were steady, but his mind raced, distracted by the uncertainty that lingered at the edges of his thoughts. His eyes, unfocused and distant, were lost in a world of their own. There was no one around him, just a silent moment of reflection before the love of his life would walk toward him. Scott was a 35-year-old man, known for his passion for music and his dedication to teaching others. He had spent his life sharing the beauty of melody and harmony with his students, his voice often a guiding light for those willing to listen and learn. He had always prided himself on his connection to the music, feeling the rhythm, the tone, the emotions in every note. But today, as he stood at the altar, the music of the world around him felt distant, almost like a faint echo in the back of his mind. His dark hair, carefully combed back, was just the way he liked it, neat, yet not overly styled. His stubble, a few days old, gave him a relaxed, laid-back look, adding to his natural charm. Despite not being able to see, there was a sense of peace that radiated from him. The joy in his heart, though hidden from view, was palpable to those around him. His radiant smile, however faint, lit up his face as his mind drifted to the one person who had filled his life with meaning. Tina, even though he couldn't look at her, he felt her presence deeply, and that alone brought him more comfort than he could ever explain. "Scott, you look amazing, man," came the familiar voice of his best friend, James, who stood beside him as the best man. "Tina's going to be speechless when she sees you." James had been by his side for as long as Scott could remember, through every up and down, every laugh, and every tear. Their bond had weathered the tests of time, and there was no one Scott trusted more. James's voice was a steady anchor, a reminder of the years they had spent together, laughing about silly things and sharing dreams that now felt like distant memories. But today was different. Today they were standing at the threshold of a new Chapter 1 that was filled with hope, love, and possibilities. Scott let out a nervous laugh, trying to hide the fluttering in his chest. "Well, at least one of us will be able to enjoy the view," he joked, though there was a subtle sadness in his voice, a shadow that flickered through the words. The past 12 months had been a whirlwind of challenges. Losing his sight so suddenly had upended everything he knew, throwing him into a world of uncertainty. The absence of vision had left him struggling to find his place in a world that now felt foreign. But in the midst of the darkness, there had been one constant light. Tina. Her love had been his anchor, his guiding star in the midst of the storm. From the moment she had entered his life, she had become the light he could always rely on. Her patience, her compassion, her understanding, they had all shone through during his darkest moments, lifting him up when he thought he couldn't go on. He often thought about how much he had changed since meeting her, how his entire outlook on life had shifted. No longer was he defined by the music he could play or the notes he could sing. Now, he was defined by the love they shared, and the journey they were about to take together. As Scott stood at the altar, lost in the beauty of his thoughts, he couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in the past year. It had been a year of challenges, a year that had tested his strength and his spirit in ways he never could have imagined. It had started on a crisp autumn morning, just like any other. He had been walking down the sidewalk toward his favorite cafe during a break from teaching at the conservatory, excited to grab his usual cappuccino and enjoy a few moments of peace before diving back into the world of music. The aroma of freshly roasted coffee and the comforting scent of baked bread had filled the air, mingling with the earthy fragrance of fallen leaves. It was a scene that Scott had enjoyed countless times before, but little did he know that day would change his life forever. He had entered the cafe, greeting Mike, the barista, with his usual friendly smile. "The usual, Mike?" he asked, eager to take a seat by the window and enjoy his coffee while people watching. "Sure thing, Professor," Mike replied with a cheerful nod. Scott made his way to his favorite spot near the window, the one he always chose because it allowed him to watch the world go by. It was a simple pleasure, but one that gave him a sense of connection to the hustle and bustle of life outside. He'd sit there, sipping his coffee, lost in his thoughts, observing the people walking by, the joggers, the parents with strollers, the children laughing in the street, and then he saw her. It was as though the world had stopped for a moment, as if time itself had held its breath. She walked by the window, and Scott's heart skipped a beat. Her long, flowing hair danced with the breeze, her steps light and graceful, and her floral dress seemed to twirl with the rhythm of her movement. For a moment, Scott was so captivated by her beauty that he forgot to breathe. She was, without question, the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. His eyes followed her as she walked down the street, but in a blink she was gone. His gaze lingered at the spot where she had been, and he couldn't help but feel an inexplicable connection to her, though they had never exchanged a word. "Scott," Mike's voice brought him back to the present. "Your coffee's ready." "Looking at that woman again, huh? You're starting to act like a creep, man. Why not go talk to her?" Mike's teasing words gave Scott the push he needed. He knew he had to act, but it wasn't that simple. His heart raced as he grabbed his coffee, and for the first time in ages, he felt a surge of courage. Without thinking, he walked out of the cafe and into the street, scanning the crowd for the woman who had stolen his thoughts. But just as he was about to find her, everything changed. A deafening screech of tires on asphalt filled the air, followed by a shout of warning. Scott's body stiffened as the world around him seemed to tilt, and then darkness. When Scott awoke, the world around him was shrouded in an eerie silence. The faint hum of hospital machinery, the distant murmur of voices in the hallway, all seemed to fade into the background. He tried to blink, to rub his eyes, to do anything that might bring clarity, but it was futile. The darkness, thick and impenetrable, clung to him like a heavy weight. His heart raced, and panic surged through his chest as he realized, with growing horror, that he couldn't see. His hands trembled as they fumbled for something familiar, anything that could anchor him in this strange new world. The soft sheets beneath him, the sterile smell of the hospital room, they were all just sensations he couldn't quite place. "Hello," he called out, his voice trembling, the fear in his chest rising like a wave. "Please, someone, I can't see." His words sounded foreign to him, as if they came from another world, a world he no longer understood. The silence that followed was deafening. Then a soft voice broke through the quiet. It was gentle, almost melodic. "Scott, It's okay. You're in a hospital. You've been in an accident. You're safe now. Scott's breath caught in his throat. He tried to focus on the voice, to make sense of what it was telling him, but the overwhelming sense of disorientation and fear clouded his mind. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words felt caught in his throat. The days that followed were a blur of medical exams, tests, and consultations. The doctors explained that the cause of his blindness was not due to damage to his eyes, but rather to an injury to the visual cortex of his brain. It was a rare condition, they said, a consequence of the trauma he had sustained during the accident. The doctors were cautious, speaking in technical terms that Scott could barely comprehend. He heard words like neuroplasticity, visual processing, and temporary loss, but they felt distant and hollow. They reassured him that his sight might return, but only time would tell. There was hope, they said, but no guarantees. Your vision loss could be temporary or permanent, one neurologist explained. It depends on how well your brain heals. We'll start treatment to reduce the swelling in your brain. And you'll also participate in rehabilitation to stimulate the neural pathways. We'll take it one step at a time. Despite the doctor's optimism, Scott's world felt like it had crumbled. The music, which had always been his constant companion, now felt distant, like a melody he could no longer hear. He could no longer teach his students, could no longer immerse himself in the world he once knew. And what was worse, the future seemed as uncertain as the darkness around him. It was in this dark, uncertain place that Tina entered his life. He had no idea who she was, or how she had come to be there, but when she first spoke to him, it was like a gentle touch on his soul. "You have a visitor," a nurse said, her voice soft and compassionate. "Her name is Tina." Tina, the name felt warm, comforting, though Scott had no idea what she looked like or how she had found her way into his hospital room. And then, her voice soft, soothing, and full of kindness, called his name. "Scott, can you hear me?" "Yes." Scott responded, his voice hoarse. He tried to lift his hand to greet her, but the movement felt foreign. His body was still adjusting to the shock of the accident, and his mind was struggling to catch up. "I'm Tina," she said, her voice gentle but filled with concern. "I saw the accident. I was there when it happened. I was so worried. I just wanted to know how you're doing." Scott's heart skipped a beat. There was something in her voice, a sincerity, a warmth that immediately put him at ease. For the first time in days, he didn't feel completely alone in the world. Her presence, though unseen, felt like a beacon in the darkness. "Thank you for coming," he said, trying to smile, though he knew she couldn't see it. "I appreciate it. It's kind of you." As Tina spoke, Scott could hear the quiet care in her tone, the genuine concern for his well-being. It was a comfort to him, something he hadn't realized he had been longing for. She didn't seem to be rushing, nor did she treat him like someone fragile or pitiable. Her voice was steady and calm, and with each word she spoke, it felt like she was gradually bridging the gap between him and the world he had lost. The first time she helped him eat was when he truly began to feel a connection to her. It was a simple, almost mundane act, but Tina approached it with such patience and tenderness that it made him feel, for the first time, like someone truly cared. "Here," she said softly, guiding his hand toward the plate. "This is the chicken, and this is the mashed potato. I'll help you with the fork. You can take your time." Scott had been so overwhelmed by the sightlessness that he hadn't even realized how difficult some of the simplest tasks had become. Eating, for example, had once been an automatic act, but now every movement felt unfamiliar and clumsy. Yet, Tina's voice, calm and reassuring, helped him find his rhythm again. She described each bite, each sensation, with such clarity that it almost felt like he could see it through her words. Her presence became a daily comfort. She came to visit him every day, bringing with her not just stories about the outside world, but also an endless supply of music. Sometimes she'd bring her guitar, and Scott would listen, mesmerized by the way the strings resonated in the room, feeling the vibrations in his chest. Other times, she would read to him or share anecdotes from her day, painting pictures with her words. It was in these quiet moments that Scott began to realize something he hadn't expected. He was beginning to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. Tina's presence brought light into his life, a light he hadn't realized was missing. She helped him navigate the darkness, not just by guiding him physically, but by showing him how to find meaning in a world that no longer made sense. She taught him to see with his heart, not his eyes, and through her, Scott learned that the world wasn't just what he could sit, was also what he could feel, hear, and experience through his senses. As the months passed, their bond deepened. What had started as a simple act of kindness turned into a deep and transformative friendship. They spent hours talking, laughing, and sharing their passions. Scott shared his love for music, teaching Tina about music theory, singing for her, and even playing the piano when his hands were steady enough. Tina, in turn, shared stories about her work as a kindergarten teacher, her students, and her life outside the hospital. It was clear to both of them that their connection was growing into something more. What had once been a daily visit, an act of kindness from one person to another, was now a shared journey, a bond that neither could have predicted. As their friendship blossomed, Scott found himself anticipating each visit with increasing excitement. His heart raced at the sound of her footsteps approaching, and each time she laughed, it felt like the entire room was filled with light, and every time she touched him, whether it was a gentle hand on his arm or a tender touch to his face, he felt the warmth of her love and the depth of her care. One quiet spring afternoon, as they sat together in the park near his house, Scott realized something he had never expected. He was in love with Tina. The sound of children playing in the distance, the fragrance of blooming flowers, and the gentle breezle of it created an atmosphere of magic, a world that was alive and vibrant. Tina sat beside him, her voice light, as she spoke about something mundane, but Scott wasn't listening to her words anymore. Instead, he was listening to the sound of her voice, to the way it made him feel, to the way his heart beat faster whenever she was near. "Tina," Scott said softly, his voice filled with emotion, "I can't see your face, but I feel like I know every part of you. You brought light into my life when everything was dark. I think I'm in love with you." There was a long moment of silence, and Scott's heart began to pound. He feared he had made a mistake, that the words had come too soon. But then he felt Tina's hands gently touch his face, and her lips met his in a soft, emotional kiss. "I love you too, Scott," she whispered, her voice full of warmth and tenderness. As the months passed, Scott's life began to shift from the shadow of his accident to the light of new possibilities. With Tina by his side, the once unbearable darkness had slowly started to lose its power over him. Her love had given him strength. He didn't know he had. He had become a man reshaped, not by the loss of his vision, but by the unwavering support and belief that Tina had given him. Each day he spent with her felt like a new chance at life, a new chapter that was far more beautiful than he ever could have imagined. In the months following his confession of love, Scott's determination grew stronger. Tina had been with him through every doctor's appointment, every therapy session, every step of his healing process. Her presence was like an anchor, steady and constant, and it gave him the courage to face each challenge, even the ones that seemed impossible. Every small victory, every moment of progress was shared with Tina, and together they celebrated the milestones that many would take for granted. A steady hand guiding him during rehabilitation sessions, a familiar voice calming him after a particularly difficult day. Tina had become more than just his love. She had become his lifeline. One sunny afternoon, while walking through the park near his house where they had shared so many moments together, Scott realized just how far he had come. A few months ago, he would have been lost in the crowd, unable to navigate the world around him. But now, with Tina's guidance, he could walk freely with her at his side. They had learned to communicate without words, their bond so deep that a simple glance or a gentle squeeze of the hand spoke volumes. He had regained a sense of independence, but more importantly, he had regained the sense that he was truly seen not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. It was on that very day that Scott made a decision. He was ready, he had known for some time, but now it was clear he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Tina. She had been his rock, his guiding star through everything. He had fallen in love with her, not just for the love and care she had given him, but for the way she had helped him find joy in the simplest moments. He could no longer imagine his world without her. With his father's help, Scott chose a delicate white gold ring, a small solitaire diamond sparkling with meaning. It was simple, just like their love, but it was perfect. He wanted to give Tina something beautiful, something that reflected the journey they had been on together. He knew that no material gift could ever truly capture what she had given him, but this was a start. This was a symbol of the future they were going to build. Scott planned the proposal carefully. He remembered the exact spot in the park where they had shared their first kiss, how the world seemed to stop in that moment. It was a place of significance, a place that represented everything they had overcome. And so, one bright morning, Scott took Tina there, heart racing with nervous excitement. They sat on the same bench where they had once shared their hopes and dreams, the same bench where their lives had taken an unexpected turn. The air was warm, the sun shining through the leaves, and the sound of children playing in the distance created a peaceful atmosphere. The world felt still, as if waiting for the next chapter to unfold. "Tina," Scott said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "I know I can't see your face, but I feel like I know every part of you. You've brought light into my life when I was lost in darkness. You've made me believe in love again, in hope, and in the beauty of life, even when it seemed impossible. I think I'm in love with you more than words could ever describe, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you, by your side, through everything. Will you marry me?" For a moment, there was silence. Scott's heart thudded in his chest, and his mind raced with doubt. Had he said the right thing? Would she say yes? Was it too soon? But then, as if in answer, he felt Tina's delicate hands take his, and her lips touched his in a kiss that was both tender and full of emotion. "I love you too, Scott," Tina whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." Tears of joy filled Scott's eyes as he slid the ring onto Tina's finger, knowing that this moment would be the beginning of everything they had dreamed of. Tina laughed softly, the sound music to his ears, and he could feel her warmth, her happiness radiating through their embrace. In the months leading up to their wedding, The couple focused on building the future they had both longed for. They talked endlessly about their dreams, their goals, and how they wanted to live their lives. Scott was no longer defined by the tragedy he had endured, nor was he solely the man who had lost his sight. He was a man who had been reborn, not because his eyes had healed, but because his heart had found its way back to love. With Tina, he could face anything. As their wedding day approached, something strange began to happen. At first, it was subtler, flicker of light here, a shadow there. Scott began to notice that his world was no longer entirely dark. There were moments when he could make out shapes, outlines, and even flashes of color. It wasn't clear, and it wasn't constant, but it was enough to give him hope. He didn't tell Tina right away, not wanting to raise her hopes too high, but deep down, he felt that something miraculous was happening. The day of their wedding arrived, and Scott stood at the altar, his heart a whirlwind of emotions. He was nervous, excited, and overwhelmed by the love that surrounded him. As the first chords of the wedding march filled the air, something shifted inside him. His vision, which had been nothing but darkness, began to clear slowly but unmistakably. He blinked several times, almost not believing it. But as the music played and the guests' excited whispers filled the air, he began to see Dot at first. It was just flashes, shapes, shadows, and colors, but then they became more defined. He could make out the outlines of the flowers decorating the aisle, the smiling faces of the guests, the golden rays of sunlight streaming through the windows. And then, as Tina walked down the aisle, her white dress glowing like a cloud, he saw her for the first time. Tears welled up in Scott's eyes as he watched Tina approach. She was radiant, her long hair elegantly styled and adorned with white flowers, her bouquet of white roses held gently in her hands. Her eyes locked with his, and he could see the joy, the love, and the anticipation in them. When Tina reached the altar, she immediately sensed the change. There was something different in Scott's eyes, something that had been absent for so long. She stopped in her tracks, her breath catching as she saw the intense focus in his gaze. "Scott," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "What's happened? You can see me." Scott gently reached out, his fingers brushing her face, tracing the lines of her features. The tears streaming down his face were a mix of relief, joy, and gratitude. "It's you, Tina," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." Tina gasped, suddenly remembering the man she had seen through the window at the cafe all those months ago. "Was it you, the man I saw, watching me from the window?" Scott smiled, tears mingling with laughter. "Yes, it was always you. I admired you from afar, not knowing that you would be the one to save me in my darkness." The officiant, clearly moved by the couple's story, cleared his throat, unable to hide his own emotions. "Well, it seems we have a miracle on our hands. Shall we proceed with the ceremony?" The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of joy. Every word they spoke, every promise they made, felt like it held a deeper meaning, a deeper connection than ever before. When they were finally declared husband and wife, they shared a kiss that was filled with love, gratitude, and all the emotions they had been holding inside. As the night continued, Scott and Tina found a moment alone beneath the starlit sky. They stood hand in hand, taking in the beauty of the world around them. "You know," Scott said softly, his voice full of wonder, "for so long, I thought that losing my sight was the worst thing that could have ever happened to me. But now, I see it was the best thing. It brought me to you." Tina squeezed his hand, smiling up at him. "And it brought me to you." Who would have thought that the man I saw through the window and the brave patient at the hospital would become my husband? Scott laughed, pulling her close. Fate has an interesting sense of humor, doesn't it? It certainly does, Tina agreed, leaning in for a kiss that was full of promises for the future. In the following days, Scott's doctors were astonished by his recovery. After a series of tests, they attributed it to the neuroplasticity of his brain, the brain's ability to adapt and repair itself. His vision wasn't fully restored, but it had come back enough